The overconfident arrival, the pride before the fall. The Zephyrian war fleet emerged from hyperspace like a dark omen against the star-speckled void. 300 vessels strong, their obsidian hulls gleamed with an otherworldly menace that had struck fear into 47 conquered civilizations. At the fleet's heart, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion dwarfed even the largest human space stations. Its weapon arrays, capable of reducing planets to cosmic dust. Admiral Kextar stood on the command bridge, his 6 arms folded behind his chitinous back as he gazed upon the primitive solar system spread before them. His compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, reflected the distant glow of Earth's sun with cold calculation. The neural crest atop his elongated skull pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that betrayed his anticipation. Intelligence reports. "Confirm, Admiral," croaked his second-in-command, Sub-Admiral Yixpol, her voice carrying the wet, guttural tones of their species. The humans possess no significant space-based defenses. Their technology appears to be at least 3 centuries behind our own standards. Kextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. 3 centuries. He had personally overseen campaigns against species far more advanced than these hairless primates, and each had fallen within solar cycles. The humans would not even provide adequate support. "Show me their pathetic attempts at military presence," he commanded, his primary arms gesturing toward the holographic display that materialized before them. The tactical screen revealed Earth's orbital infrastructure in painful detail. Ancient space stations that looked like they were held together with primitive welding and desperate hope. Satellite networks that any competent engineer could disable with basic electromagnetic pulses. A handful of ships that might have impressed the natives, but looked like children's toys compared to Zephyrian technology. "Look at those vessels," Kextar pointed with one of his secondary arms. "Their hulls are barely a meter thick. Our smallest fighters could punch through their armor with kinetic rounds alone. And their weapon systems." He paused for dramatic effect. "Chemical propulsion for their missiles. Chemical. They might as well be throwing rocks." The bridge crew joined their admiral's amusement, their chittering filling the command center. These humans had achieved faster-than-light communication, which was the only reason the Zephyrian Empire had bothered to investigate this backwater system. But now, seeing their primitive military capabilities, it was clear this would be nothing more than a resource acquisition mission. The warning they ignored as the fleet approached the edge of human territory. A transmission crackled through their communication arrays. The image that appeared on their screens showed a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform, though it looked absurdly simple compared to Zephyrian battle gear. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Coalition," the human sighed, her voice steady despite the overwhelming odds she faced. "Your fleet has entered human space without permission. We request that you state your intentions immediately." Kextar leaned forward, studying the creature before him. Small, fragile-looking, with only 2 arms and eyes that seemed almost comically tiny compared to his own. Her skin was the pale color of a dying star, and her hair was bound back in a style that suggested military discipline. Most amusing of all, she appeared to be completely serious. "Fascinating," he muttered. "The prey wishes to negotiate." Captain Shun continued, seemingly unaware of the derision she was facing. "If your intentions are hostile, we advise you to reconsider. Humanity will defend itself with everything at our disposal. This is your only warning." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence for a moment before erupting in laughter that echoed through the massive vessel's corridors. "Everything at their disposal," Kextar repeated, wiping moisture from his compound eyes. "Did you catalog their everything, Sub-Admiral?" Yixpol consulted her tactical readout with exaggerated ceremony. 43 vessels of varying sizes. "Admiral, the largest appears to be some sort of converted cargo hauler. Their total combined firepower registers as approximately 0.003% of our forward battery capacity. 0.003. Kekstar savored the number. I've seen mining operations with more formidable defenses. He straightened, his voice taking on the formal tone of command. Send our standard surrender demand. Give them 1 of their hours to comply before we begin the cleansing. The message was transmitted with all the pomp and ceremony the Zephyrian Empire had perfected over centuries of conquest. It detailed exactly what would happen to any world that dared resist their expansion, described the glory of serving the Empire as a client species, and offered the humans the incredible honor of immediate surrender to avoid total annihilation. The response came back in less than 10 minutes. Captain Shun's face appeared again, but this time there was something different in her expression. What Kekstar had initially mistaken for fear now looked more like ... operation. The Earth Defense Coalition respectfully declines your offer, she said simply. We'll see you out there. The first crack in their confidence as the Zephyrian fleet advanced into the inner system. Long-range sensors began picking up unusual readings. The human ships, rather than fleeing or forming desperate defensive clusters as expected, were moving in precise formations that seemed almost ... professional. Admiral, called out Navigation Officer Zaxim from his station. The human vessels are adjusting their positions. They appear to be ... coordinating? Kekstar frowned, his neural crest dimming slightly. Coordinating what? Their surrender ceremony? But as the tactical display updated, showing the human fleet's movements in real time, even the most confident Zephyrian officers began to feel the first whispers of unease. The humans weren't running. They weren't panicking. They were taking positions with the kind of precision that spoke of training, preparation, and most unsettling of all, confidence. Perhaps they don't understand the futility of resistance, suggested Sub-Admiral Yix-Pol, though her voice lacked its earlier certainty. Or perhaps, Kekstar said slowly, studying the tactical display with growing interest, they know something we don't. The thought was dismissed almost as soon as it formed. What could primitive humans possibly know that had escaped the attention of the galaxy's most successful military empire? But as the distance between the fleets continued to close, more anomalies appeared in the sensor readings. Human ships were moving with energy signatures that didn't match their outdated propulsion systems. Their formations suggested tactical doctrines that seemed far too sophisticated for their apparent technological level. Most puzzling of all, they weren't broadcasting the kind of panicked communications one would expect from a doomed defense force. Instead, their transmissions were calm, professional, and encrypted with algorithms that the Zephyrian computers were having surprising difficulty breaking. "Sir," called out communications specialist Vexara, "we're detecting multiple transmission bursts from the human vessels. They appear to be coordinating their movements through some form of quantum encrypted network." Kekstar's primary eyes focused on the communications officer with sharp intensity. Quantum encryption? Our intelligence reports indicated they were still using primitive radio transmissions for most of their communications. Our intelligence may have been incomplete, Admiral. The words hung in the air like a toxic gas. Incomplete intelligence had been the downfall of more than one military campaign, but the Zephyrian Empire prided itself on thorough reconnaissance. They had monitored human transmissions for cycles, cataloged their technology, analyzed their military capabilities. How could they have missed something as significant as quantum communication networks? The trap reveals itself. As the Zephyrian fleet entered weapons range, Admiral Kekstar gave the order that had preceded the fall of 47 worlds. All vessels, assume attack formation Zeta Prime. Target their largest vessels first. Make this quick and decisive. The response was immediate and coordinated. 300 Zephyrian warships moved into their battle formation with the precision of a cosmic ballet, weapons charging, targeting systems locking onto the outnumbered human vessels. It should have been over in minutes. The first volley from the Zephyrian fleet lit up the darkness between worlds like a miniature star being born. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, and kinetic projectiles streaked across the void toward their targets with enough destructive power to level mountain ranges. And then something impossible happened. The human ships moved, not the desperate, random, evasive maneuvers of a panicking prey species, but coordinated, precise movements that seemed to anticipate exactly where each Zephyrian weapon would be. Ships that should have been obliterated danced between energy beams with impossible grace. Vessels that appeared to be directly in the path of plasma torpedoes somehow ended up exactly where the weapons weren't. What in the 17 hells? Kekstar breathed, watching his devastating first strike accomplish absolutely nothing. But the humans weren't content to simply avoid destruction. As the Zephyrian weapons passed harmlessly through space, the human fleet responded with a coordinated counterattack that defied everything the aliens thought they knew about primitive technology. The weapons that struck the Zephyrian vessels weren't the chemical rockets and crude projectiles their intelligence had predicted. Instead, they faced coherent energy beams that sliced through advanced shielding like it was decorative paper. Electromagnetic pulses that somehow bypassed their hardened electronics, and kinetic projectiles that moved with velocities that should have been impossible for chemical propulsion. Damage report. Kekstar barked as his flagship shuddered under impacts that shouldn't have been possible. Forward shields down to 60%, Admiral, reported Damage Control Officer Kixanen, his voice tight with disbelief. Hull breach on Deck 7. How are they penetrating our defenses? Kekstar stared at the tactical display, watching his supposedly superior fleet take damage from weapons that shouldn't have existed. More disturbing than the damage itself was the precision with which it was being delivered. The humans weren't firing randomly or desperately. They were targeting specific systems with surgical accuracy, as if they knew exactly where to hit for maximum effect. They're targeting our shield generators, observed Sub-Admiral Yixpo, studying the damage patterns, and our weapon capacitors, and our navigation arrays. It's like they know our ship designs better than we do. The terrible possibility that had been lurking at the edge of Kekstar's consciousness finally demanded acknowledgement. Get me a detailed analysis of those human weapons. I want to know how they're doing this. As the battle continued to unfold in ways no Zephyrian tactician had ever imagined, the scanner readings began to tell a story that chilled even the most battle-hardened veterans. The human weapons weren't just effective. They were specifically designed to counter Zephyrian technology. The energy frequencies perfectly attuned to disrupt their shields. The electromagnetic pulses calibrated exactly to their electronic systems. The kinetic projectiles made from materials that were specifically chosen to defeat Zephyrian armor. This wasn't a desperate last stand by a primitive species. This was a carefully planned ambush by an enemy that had been studying them far longer than they had been studying it. Admiral Kekstar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest. Fear. Not the simple fear of death that any warrior might face in battle, but the deep, existential fear of realizing that everything you thought you knew was wrong. The humans had been waiting for them, and they were ready. The hunters become the hunted. The terrible realization, the second wave of human attacks, came with a precision that made Admiral Kekstar's compound eyes contract in horror. What had initially appeared to be lucky shots or desperate gambles now revealed themselves as part of a coordinated strategy that had been years in the making. Admiral, Communications Specialist Vex Ara's voice cracked with barely controlled panic. We're receiving detailed technical specifications for our own ships from the human vessels. They know our weaknesses better than our own engineers. Kekstar felt his chitinous exoskeleton grow cold as the implications hit him. The neural crest atop his skull dimmed to barely visible levels as he processed what this meant. "Show me," he commanded, though part of him already dreaded what he would see. The holographic display materialized, showing technical schematics of Zephyrian vessels with annotations in human languages. Critical system locations were highlighted. Optimal attack vectors were calculated. Weapon frequencies specifically designed to exploit shield harmonics were listed with scientific precision. It was like looking at their own military manuals, translated and improved upon by an enemy. Had dismissed as primitive. "Impossible," Sub-Admiral Yix-Pol whispered, her secondary arms trembling as she studied the data. "How could they have acquired this information? Our ships have never been in human space before today." But even as she spoke, more pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Long-range reconnaissance drones that had been dismissed as space. Debris, monitoring stations disguised as innocent scientific satellites. Communication intercepts that had been so subtle, so perfectly camouflaged, that the Zephyrian intelligence apparatus had never even detected them. The humans hadn't just been watching. They had been learning, studying, preparing for this exact confrontation, while the Zephyrian Empire had been congratulating itself on its superior. Intelligence gathering. Captain Sarah Chun's face appeared again on their communication screen. But this time her expression held none of the diplomatic courtesy from their first exchange. Her small human eyes were hard with determination, and when she spoke, her voice carried the confidence of someone who held all the advantages. "Admiral Kextar of the Zephyrian Empire," she said, somehow knowing his name and rank despite never having been introduced. "I am Captain Sarachun, and I believe we need to have a more honest conversation." Kextar found himself responding before he could stop himself. "How do you know my identity, human?" "We've been monitoring your communications for the past 6 years," Chun replied matter-of-factly. "We know the names of your officers, the capabilities of your vessels, the standard tactics you employ against technologically inferior species. What you don't seem to understand is that we are not technologically inferior. The truth behind human preparation," as if summoned by Captain Chun's words, the tactical display updated to show new contacts approaching from multiple vectors. Human ships, but not the converted cargo haulers and outdated patrol vessels that had formed the initial defense fleet. These were vessels that looked nothing like anything in the Zephyrian intelligence files. Sleek, angular craft that moved with impossible speed and grace. Ships that seemed to bend light around their hulls, making them difficult to target. Massive vessels that appeared to be emerging from stealth fields that had hidden them from Zephyrian sensors until this moment. "Meet the real Earth Defense Fleet," Captain Chun continued, her image now flanked by 2 other humans. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, our chief xenobiologist, has spent the last decade studying Zephyrian physiology and psychology. Commander Jake Morrison, our tactical coordinator, has analyzed every battle you've fought for the past 20 years. And I've had the privilege of preparing our people for the day when your empire finally turned its attention to humanity." "Doctor." Vasquez stepped forward, her appearance deceivingly delicate compared to the massive alien warriors she was addressing. "We know about your species' overconfidence, Admiral. It's a psychological weakness that has served you well against truly primitive civilizations, but it becomes a critical vulnerability when facing a prepared opponent." Commander Morrison, a broad-shouldered human with scars that spoke of combat experience, added his own analysis. "Your tactical doctrines haven't evolved in over 50 years because they haven't needed to. Every species you've encountered has been either too primitive to mount effective resistance or too panicked to implement coherent strategies. You've forgotten how to adapt because you've never needed to." Kextar felt something crack inside his chest as the truth of their words settled into his consciousness. The Zephyrian Empire's greatest strength had always been their technological superiority in psychological warfare. They had grown accustomed to enemies that were either too afraid or too outmatched to think clearly. But the humans weren't afraid, and they certainly weren't outmatched. You want to know how we acquired intelligence on your fleet compositions? Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice taking on the tone of a lecturer addressing particularly slow students. You've been broadcasting them on unsecured channels for decades. Your confidence in your technological superiority made you careless with operational security. Every world you've conquered, every species you've enslaved, every battle you've fought has been documented and transmitted across your empire using communication protocols that a determined opponent could intercept and decode, Commander Morrison added. We've been listening to your internal communications for years, learning your language, understanding your culture, studying your weaknesses. The hunters become the hunted. As the reinforcement fleet fully revealed itself, Admiral Kextar realized with growing horror that the Zephyrians were now outnumbered. What had begun as a routine conquest against a primitive species had transformed into a carefully orchestrated trap where his fleet was the prey. All vessels implement evasive pattern Gamma 7, he commanded, falling back on traditional tactics even as his mind reeled from the scope of human preparation. But the humans were ready for that too. As the Zephyrian ships attempted to regroup and reassess, they found themselves herded by precisely placed human vessels, channeled into positions where their superior numbers became a disadvantage rather than an asset. They're boxing us in, observed Navigation Officer Zaxim, his voice tight with disbelief. How are they coordinating this level of fleet movement? The answer came in the form of a new revelation that struck at the heart of Zephyrian military doctrine. The human ships weren't just communicating through quantum encrypted channels. They were operating as nodes in a distributed artificial intelligence network that could process tactical information and coordinate responses faster than any organic command structure. Each of their ships is connected to a collective intelligence that can analyze our movements and predict our responses in real time, reported Intelligence Officer Big Star, his usually steady voice wavering with implications he was only beginning to understand. They're not fighting as individual vessels. They're operating as a single unified organism. Sub-Admiral Yixpol's secondary arms began the ritual gestures of prayers to long-dead gods as the scope of their predicament became clear. We're not fighting ships, Admiral. We're fighting a single entity that happens to be distributed across multiple platforms. The battle that followed was unlike anything in Zephyrian military history. Every tactic they employed was anticipated and countered. Every strategy they implemented was turned against them with surgical precision. Ships that tried to retreat found their escape routes blocked. Vessels that attempted to group for mutual support were isolated and systematically disabled. Most terrifying of all, the humans were demonstrating a level of restraint that spoke to absolute confidence in their victory. Rather than destroying Zephyrian vessels outright, they were targeting propulsion and weapon systems, leaving the ships intact but helpless. It was the kind of surgical precision that required not just superior technology, but superior understanding of Zephyrian ship design and crew psychology. The final lesson, as the Eternal Dominion found itself surrounded by human vessels, its weapons disabled and its shields failing, Admiral Kextar finally understood the true scope of human capability. This hadn't been a battle between a superior and inferior species. This had been a masterclass in strategic thinking, technological adaptation, and psychological warfare, taught by a species that had learned to survive by being smarter, not stronger. Captain Chun's image appeared one final time on the command screen, but now she was flanked by representatives of other species, beings that Kextar recognized from worlds the Zephyrian Empire had conquered. The thing about humans, Admiral, she said quietly, is that we're very good at making friends. Every species your empire has enslaved, every world you've conquered, Every civilization you've crushed has had refugees, survivors, individuals who escaped to tell their stories. And we listened to all of them. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward again. Did you really think you could conquer 47 civilizations without someone keeping track? Without someone preparing for the day when your expansion would finally meet? Organized resistance? Commander Morrison's scarred face carried a grim smile. Every species you've defeated has contributed to your downfall. Their knowledge, their technology, their understanding of your methods. Humanity didn't develop these weapons and strategies alone. We had help from everyone you've wronged. As if to emphasize the point, the tactical display updated to show the true scope of the fleet now surrounding them. Ships of dozens of different designs, representing technologies from across the galaxy, all coordinated under human command, but crewed by survivors of Zephyrian conquest. This is the Galactic Liberation Fleet, Captain Sean announced. Humanity is just one member of a coalition that's been preparing for this moment for decades. Your empire's greatest weakness wasn't technological or tactical. It was the assumption that conquered peoples would simply accept their fate. Admiral Kextar felt his neural crest flicker with patterns of defeat recognition, an instinctive response hardwired into Zephyrian genetics from their own primitive past. For the first time in his military career, he was facing an enemy that was not just his equal, but his superior in every meaningful way. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely audible even to his own crew. "Now," Captain Sean replied, "you learn what it means to be on the other side of conquest. Your crews will be treated with the dignity and respect that your empire has never shown to others. Your ships will be studied so we can better understand Zephyrian technology. And you, personally, will have the opportunity to help us locate and liberate every world your empire has enslaved." The communication ended, leaving the bridge of the Eternal Dominion in stunned silence. Around them, the vast fleet that had once been the pride of an empire drifted helplessly, testimony to the danger of underestimating one's enemies. As human boarding pods approached his flagship, Admiral Kextar realized that this day would be remembered not as another glorious conquest for the Zephyrian Empire, but as the moment when humanity announced its presence on the galactic stage. And they had done it not through brutality or superior firepower, but through intelligence, preparation, and the simple human capacity to turn enemies into allies. The galaxy would never be the same.